The night begins without haste. The wind moves slowly through the narrow streets, brushing against wooden doors and thatched roofs. Somewhere beyond the noise of the modern world, the past stirs, faint, steady, and unhurried. A single lantern swings above a doorway, its flame bending with each breath of air. The smell of wood smoke, wet straw, and cold rain lingers like memory. It is the 14th century. The world is smaller here and slower. The rhythm of life is measured not by clocks but by hunger. Each sound, a cart's wheel, a distant dog, the rustle of cloth, belongs to the same quiet order. Nothing moves quickly, even time itself seems cautious, unsure whether to go forward or back. Down the narrow lanes, shadows stretch long across the cobblestones. Footsteps once passed here, careful and light, belonging to people who knew darkness not as danger, but as cover. They did not steal for glory, they stole because the stomach leaves no room for pride. Tonight we drift among them, through the still air and the flicker of dying candles, through the silence that hums beneath every roof. The world sleeps, but history does not. It breathes softly beside us, waiting to be remembered. Life and the reason for theft. The weight of ordinary days. The world of the 14th century was built on endurance. Every morning began the same way, a grey sky, a thin wind, and the sound of work already waiting. The light fell cold across fields that never seemed to rest. Men and women bent their backs to the soil, shaping furrows with hands already cracked before the first meal of the day. There was no notion of progress, no promise that tomorrow would be lighter. Life was not measured in dreams, but in what could be carried home before nightfall. The poor did not think of themselves as poor. They thought of themselves as living, and that was enough. A bowl of grain, a dry loaf, a roof that did not leak. These were small victories. But even small victories needed luck, and luck was a stranger that rarely stayed long. When the harvest failed, it was not a tragedy. It was a season. When taxes rose, it was not injustice. It was weather. People simply learned to bend beneath it and keep breathing. The scent of hunger lived in every street. You could smell it in the thin soup boiling in shared pots, in the dust of empty grain sacks, in the way children learn to chew bark just to quiet the body's noise. Work began at dawn and ended long after the sun sank, yet the reward was a handful of coins or the promise of shelter. A broken tool, a sick child, a bad storm. Any of these could turn a family from survival to despair within a single day. In this quiet desperation, theft was not a rebellion. It was a shadow that followed necessity. A crust of bread left cooling on a windowsill. A turnip from another man's patch. An apple that rolled too far from its cart. No one called it courage. It was simply movement, the act of reaching when the stomach refused to wait. But the law did not bend for hunger. A thief was not measured by intent. The word itself was a brand, pressed invisible into the skin. Once spoken, it stayed. To be called a thief was to be rewritten. People stepped back in markets. Neighbors looked through you instead of at you. The word carried its own gravity, heavier than the emptiness it came from. And yet life went on. The plows still cut the field. The fires still burned at night. The same hands that stole also sowed and built and prayed for warmth. Hunger was the common language, and survival the only reply. When the evenings came, the world grew softer, but not kinder. The streets were lined with smoke and silence. Families gathered around dim hearths, counting what was left. A heel of bread, a bucket half full, the memory of a better season. Outside, the roads lay bare except for those who could not sleep. those who had nothing left to lose. They walked slowly, following the scent of food or the sound of snoring behind thin wooden doors. The darkness was not their enemy. It was their refuge. In this stillness, theft became part of the landscape, not an act of evil, but of rhythm. The same rhythm that made the roosters crow and the bells ring also made a hand reach for what it could not have. A loaf, a coin, a chance. The law called it sin, but hunger called it breathing. And though the night forgave them, the dawn never did. When morning came, there was no mention of what had been taken, only of what was missing. The farmer cursed the empty shelf. The baker checked his flour twice. The village whispered the same name until it settled like dust over the same door. And that was how it began, not with hatred, but with habit. The poor accused the poorer. The hungry guarded what little they had. The wheel of blame turned quietly, endlessly, and no one ever stepped off. In the end, poverty was not just the absence of food or coin, it was the heaviness of repetition, the feeling that each day was already written. There was no escape, only endurance. And when endurance ran out, there was theft. Not as a crime, but as another form of work, done under the cover of night, without pride, without noise. It was life, rearranged in shadow. The birth of a name. There was a time when hunger was not only in the stomach, but in the air itself. You could taste it in the fog that rolled through narrow alleys, in the stale smell of old bread and smoke. The city slept lightly, afraid to wake to what it had lost. Beneath its roofs lived those who worked the hardest and owned the least. Tanners, weavers, field hands, and widows who mended clothes by candlelight until their fingers stiffened. The sound of their labor filled the days, but the nights belonged to silence. When the lamps went out, the streets spoke differently, the cobblestones gleamed with moisture, and the air grew dense with the sound of distant footsteps. Somewhere, a door creaked open. Somewhere else, a lock clicked shut. The world was divided not by good or evil, but by who could afford to wait until morning. For some, sleep was safety. For others, sleep was hunger, and hunger did not wait. To steal was not a decision made in the heart, it was made in the body, in the ache of the stomach, in the dizziness that came when food was a memory instead of a meal. The first theft was never bold. It was clumsy, trembling, and filled with apology. A small hand reaching through a window for a crust of bread left to cool. A mother wrapping her shawl tighter as she walked away, hoping the silence would keep her secret. But silence was fragile. Villages were small and stories traveled faster than the wind. One word could reshape a life. Thief. It was a short word, but it carried long shadows. Once spoken, it echoed through every introduction, every trade, every meal. Children whispered it, strangers avoided it. The accused no longer walked upright. They learned to move sideways through crowds, to keep their eyes low, to live between glances. And yet, even under this quiet shame, they survived. The thief did not disappear. They adapted. They worked by moonlight, walked barefoot to leave no sound, and learned to read the weather of a street. When the watchman turned his head, when the dogs grew tired, when the baker's door was slow to close. These were not criminals. They were cartographers of desperation, mapping the spaces where life might still continue. The word thief became its own uniform. It separated one from the rest, yet it also bound them together. Among the forgotten, a kind of kinship formed, not spoken, but known. They shared hiding places, scraps of food, fragments of warmth. They learned not to trust, but to recognize, to see the same hunger in another's eyes and nod in silence. There were no guilds, no oaths, no brotherhoods, only the fragile companionship of those who existed one step beyond forgiveness. The law, distant and absolute, did not see faces, only categories. Hunger, once invisible, became a record. The thief was now part of that record, written in ink and rumour, stored in memory and whispered at the market. Some tried to return to ordinary life, to labour again, to prove worth through sweat. But the word followed them home. It lingered in their doorways in the way neighbours greeted them too carefully. It clung to them like dust on a boot, impossible to wash away. Over time, the difference between the hungry and the thief disappeared. The same soil that fed the village also grew its outcasts. Every town had a few, sleeping beneath carts or near the edges of fields. They lived quietly, unnoticed, until something went missing. Then the whispers returned, the same small storm, predictable as rain. In this way, the cycle continued, theft born from need, need born from theft, a slow turning of human necessity that no punishment could truly stop. And so in the heart of medieval Europe, the word thief became more than a crime. It became a mirror, a reflection of the world that created it, a world where survival was never fair, and where the difference between honest work and forbidden hunger was often just the width of a hand reaching into the dark. The reality of thieving, a life between cold and mud. There was nothing romantic about the life of a thief, no lantern-lit adventures, no clever escapes, no secret gold hidden beneath the floorboards. Theirs was a life lived between the cold and the mud, a narrow passage that never widened into comfort. The clothes they wore were the same season after season, the same wool turned stiff with rain, smoke and sweat, until it felt less like fabric and more like skin. They smelled of earth, of damp straw, of the smoke from fires they never owned. The world they moved through was silent, cautious, always watching. When they lay down to rest, it was never quite sleep, only a brief surrender to exhaustion before hunger called again. Most houses offered little worth stealing. The homes of peasants were plain and half empty, filled with the sounds of wind through cracks and the scent of barley dust. A wooden spoon, a clay pot mended with ash and twine, a crust of bread left from supper, a single goat tethered to the wall. To steal such things was to risk a life for what barely fed a day. But in a world ruled by scarcity, even crumbs could mean survival. The noble houses, shining faintly from afar, kept their gold locked behind stone and steel. They had guards with spears, dogs bred for the scent of fear, gates that closed like the mouth of fate. To reach them was to walk willingly toward the rope. So the thief stayed near the poor, among those whose hunger looked like their own. The thefts were small, almost invisible, a loaf from a window ledge, a hen that wandered too close to the dark, a coin lost in straw and quietly claimed by another hand. The reward was never comfort. It was the brief, fragile gift of one more sunrise. The thief ate in silence, crouched beneath hedges or behind barns, breaking bread so stale it cracked like bark. Each bite was an act of patience. The world gave nothing freely. Everything had to be taken, and every act of taking carved another mark inside the soul. There was no joy in it, but neither was there shame. There was only the dull rhythm of necessity. At dusk, when the villages dimmed into grey, and the last smoke rose from chimney holes, the thief became part of the landscape. Their footsteps were soft enough to be mistaken for wind, their shadow thin enough to pass for nothing. They learned to listen to everything, The creak of doors, the hum of dogs before they barked, the rustle of straw beneath a restless sleeper. The night was not their enemy, it was their companion, the only friend that kept secrets. They moved carefully, guided by instinct older than memory, measuring each breath, so even the dark would not hear. Theft was not skill. It was endurance disguised as motion. The body learned to move without sound, the heart to beat without panic. Fear became a quiet companion, always present but never loud. What others called crime, the thief called breathing. There was no planning, no thrill, no triumph, only the slow continuation of life through means that no longer shocked the conscience. Hunger does not leave room for morality, it replaces it with rhythm. Sometimes the thief would pause and look toward the grand houses on the hill. Light flickered behind glass windows. The sound of laughter reached faintly through the wind. They did not envy it. They did not curse it. It was as far away as the moon, bright, beautiful, unreachable. Their own world was smaller, the next hour, the next corner, the next mouthful of bread. And within that smallness there was a kind of peace, born not of joy but of surrender. The nights were long, but the mornings were longer. When dawn came, the thief disappeared into the ordinary. They carried buckets, mended fences, stacked wood beside doors. They blended into the daily rhythm, their faces as blank and weary as anyone else's. No one asked where they had been, and they offered no stories. Life in the 14th century did not require explanation, only survival. And so, day by day, they continued. Between the cold and the mud, between hunger and brief relief, between silence and the faint hum of distant life. A thief's world was small, but within that narrow space they found the simplest form of existence, to breathe, to move, to continue. Nothing more, nothing less. The rope waited somewhere ahead, but until that day arrived they lived as the earth itself lived, enduring without question, fading without complaint. Shadows of necessity. Morning spread slowly across the village, pale light creeping over the thatched roofs and broken carts. For most, it marked the beginning of labor. For the thief, it marked retreat, the slow folding of darkness back into itself. As others lifted buckets or swung hammers, the thief vanished quietly, slipping into alleys, blending with smoke. They became invisible not through magic, but through sameness. Their face was another tired face, their hands another pair of calloused hands. They walked among the world they borrowed from, unseen because they looked like everyone else. Thievery was not a constant trade, it came and went like the rain. Weeks might pass without a single act, and then hunger would return, sudden and sharp. In those moments, silence turned into movement again. A door left ajar, a sack left unwatched. The world offered its chances in whispers, and the thief learned to listen. There was no plan, only reaction, the body responding to need the way a plant bends toward light. Each act was quick, almost gentle, as if the thief feared to disturb the air. A handful of grain taken from a wagon, a strip of cloth cut from a drying line, a few copper coins misplaced during trade. The motions were small, but they carried the gravity of survival. Among thieves, there was no brotherhood, no code. The roads were too long, and trust too thin. But now and then glances met across the market, eyes that recognized the same hunger, the same weary cunning, a piece of bread shared without word, a place near the fire on a night of frost. Connection existed in fragments, fleeting as smoke, but it was enough to remind them that they were not alone in their invisibility. The world around them did not change. The lords continued to feast, the fields continued to yield, the poor continued to bend. But within this endless cycle, theft became its own language. It was how the forgotten spoke to the indifferent, not with anger, not with rebellion, but with quiet persistence. Each stolen loaf was a message carved into the silence. I am still here. Theft, in those times, was closer to breathing than to crime. It had no glory, no ambition. It was not rebellion against power, but submission to the body's need to survive. The thief's life was a repetition of small salvations, acts so minor the world barely noticed, yet each carried the same weight of consequence. The danger was constant. Every sound in the dark could be death, the snap of a twig, the cry of a dog, the distant flare of a torch. Fear lived in the bloodstream, steady and quiet. But the fear itself became familiar, a heartbeat of its own. When misfortune struck, a caught sleeve, a startled chicken, a door that closed too fast, the thief learned to vanish, into rivers, into fields, into the black folds of the night. Sometimes they hid among beggars, faces coated in ash, to blur their features. Sometimes they walked for days until their scent faded from the dog's memory. There was no map, only motion, guided by instinct and exhaustion. And yet, despite the risk, the rhythm continued. Each night was another chance, each dawn another breath of relief. Over time, the boundary between guilt and necessity dissolved. The thief no longer asked why, they simply did. The mind grew still, the body automatic. It was not defiance that kept them alive, but surrender to the hunger, to the night, to the unending need that shaped their existence. In the quiet hours before dawn, they sometimes paused to watch the world sleep. A candle flickering through a window. A field of frost shining like silver. For a moment, everything felt calm, almost holy. Not because it was safe, but because it was still. The thief stood there, unseen, breathing in the cold air, and in that breath, the distance between good and bad disappeared. There was only being. When the morning bells rang, calling others to prayer or work, the thief walked the other way. Their night's labor ended where the day began. No one would know what had changed, what was missing. Life moved forward as it always did, quietly, relentlessly. The stolen loaf would be eaten by sunset. The hunger would return by dawn. And the world, indifferent as stone, would continue turning. In the end, theft was not an act against the world, it was an act of belonging to it in the only way possible. To take was to remain part of the cycle, to keep breathing when the earth offered nothing freely. The thief did not imagine escape. They did not dream of wealth. Their hope was smaller, humbler, more enduring. To see another sunrise, to feel another night's wind, to continue unseen, unpraised, and alive. The defenses of the poor. The sound of safety. There were few locks in the villages. Iron was precious, and keys were rarer still. The poor protected what little they had not with bolts and chains, but with sound. They trusted in noise, the small symphony of alarms born from wood, straw, and instinct. A bucket balanced on a doorframe. A bell tied to a latch with a fraying cord. A handful of dry twigs scattered across the threshold, ready to crack beneath an unwelcome foot. These were the defenses of the forgotten, fragile, clever, and constant. The homes themselves were built from patience. Walls of wattle and daub, patched again and again until they leaned like old men in prayer. The floors were earth, cold in winter, damp in spring, and every step carried its own confession. Even the wind made its presence known, whispering through the cracks, stirring the hanging herbs by the fire. In this world, silence was a stranger. Every sound mattered, every creak of timber, every sigh of smoke, every drip from the thatch was a line in the night's long story. To live safely was to listen carefully. The villagers learned to read sound as others read scripture. A slow knock meant a neighbor. A hurried one meant trouble. The cry of a dog could mean anything. Wind, fox, stranger. And so the poor listened not to the bark itself, but to the rhythm of fear behind it. Dogs were the first guards, their loyalty shaped more by hunger than by command. They knew their master's scent, the weight of familiar footsteps, the tone of a human breath. At night, when the fire died and the darkness grew thick, they would stir, ears twitching to the smallest movement beyond the door. Their growl was warning enough. Then there were the geese, the loudest sentinels of the medieval world. No creature could sleep through their cry. A single flutter of feathers could rouse an entire street. They screamed at shadows, at echoes, at the very thought of movement. Their noise rolled across the fields like alarm bells, calling every sleeper to wake, every door to open. To steal from a house guarded by geese was to invite half the village to your punishment. Even the boldest thief walked wide around their reach, but sometimes even noise failed. A clever thief moved like mist, slow, invisible, seeping through the gaps between sound. They knew which doors groaned, which floors cracked, which buckets could be lifted without tipping. They mapped the village not by light, but by listening. The night itself became a living thing, breathing softly against their skin. Yet no matter how careful, silence was never perfect. A breath could betray, a whisper of cloth could echo louder than a shout. The thief moved through this fragile orchestra knowing that one wrong note could end a life. The air of those nights was heavy with tension, not from violence, but from the weight of awareness. Everyone was listening. The poor listened for thieves. The thieves listened for the poor. Even the animals listened for both. It was as if the whole world had become an ear pressed to the heart of darkness, waiting for the next sound. A thief who survived was not invisible. They were simply tolerated by fortune, spared for another night. Inside the cottages, families slept lightly. The warmth of their bodies filled the small space with breath and quiet dreams. Beneath the straw mattresses, they kept what little was precious: a coin, a piece of cloth, a carved spoon. Their trust lay not in the strength of walls, but in the nearness of one another. To wake to a noise was to reach instinctively for the nearest hand. Together they waited, hardly breathing, until the night exhaled again. Only then did rest return. The darkness had its own kind of honesty. It revealed how fragile safety truly was. There were no armies guarding these lives, no high towers to hide behind, only the bond between humans and the humble ingenuity of sound. In that shared vigilance lay a quiet kind of strength. It was not courage in the way stories tell it. It was simply awareness, a lifelong conversation with the night. By dawn, the defenses seemed almost foolish. The bells hung crooked, the buckets empty, the twigs scattered like memory. But they had done their work. The villagers woke, stretched, and began again, as though safety was something grown, not granted. The thief, if one had passed through, was already far away, following the slow curve of the road, carrying with them the echo of geese and the faint rattle of a bell, still swinging in the morning wind. The landscape of alert. In the pale hour before sunrise, the village still held its breath. The night's defences hung silent in the grey light, a network of small contraptions, half ritual, half invention. A broom against the door, a shutter pinned with bone, A pot hung loosely above the window to rattle if disturbed. These were not traps in the sense of cruelty, but of memory. Each one reminded the world that vigilance was the poor man's wealth. The people did not own iron, but they owned attention, and attention kept them alive. Outside, frost glittered on the fields. The footprints of night lay faintly visible in the soil. Fox, mouse, man, each mark telling its own story. In such a world, the difference between hunter and hunted was measured not by strength, but by sound. The villagers knew this instinctively. They moved softly, spoke low, and trained their lives around the patterns of noise. The thief who entered this landscape entered a labyrinth built from listening. Dogs stirred before dawn, sensing the change in air. Their breath rose in slow clouds, their bodies coiled in patience. To them, the world was made of scent and vibration, a constant pulse of life and intrusion. They barked not just at strangers, but at uncertainty itself. In their growl lived centuries of partnership, the bond between hunger and home. A single bark could summon a dozen torches. A thief knew that sound too well. It was the beginning of pursuit, the end of luck. The geese, though small and foolish by day, became fierce in darkness. Their cries carried far, slicing through fog and sleep. There was something almost human in their alarm, a wild, broken music that made hearts stumble. No thief forgot that sound once heard. It haunted the edges of every plan, a reminder that the night itself could scream. The villagers built more than physical defenses. They built memory into space. They placed stones where they could feel them in the dark, scattered grain on paths to hear the crunch beneath a foot, kept doors so low that even a tall man had to bow to enter. A humble act that slowed an intruder long enough to wake the house. Safety was crafted not through wealth, but through intimacy, knowing every sound the home could make, every breath it could hold. And still, even with all this care, fear never left completely. When wind moved through the eaves, someone always stirred. When a dog barked twice, someone always rose. The village never slept all at once. It slept in turns, one ear open, one dream suspended. Perhaps that was its truest defense, the rhythm of shared wakefulness, the invisible network of people listening for one another. The thief, moving through this half-sleeping world, carried their own kind of fear. Not the fear of punishment, but of noise. The betrayal of sound that could unravel every quiet intention. Each step was measured in breaths, each movement rehearsed in thought. They learned to mimic the rhythm of the wind, to move when the geese rustled, to wait when the wood sighed. Even then, the night sometimes betrayed them. A slipped stone, a dog's twitch, a door that groaned for no reason. And all at once the stillness broke like glass. When alarm spread, it spread fast. Torches flared. Feet struck the ground. Voices rose, not in anger, but in panic, the raw instinct to protect. There were no soldiers here, only neighbors with tools turned into weapons. A hoe, a pitchfork, a stick pulled from the fire. They did not chase for revenge, only for order, the fragile belief that the night could be contained. And when the silence returned, it was heavier than before, thick with breath and smoke. The dawn that followed such nights was pale and slow. The villagers gathered by wells recounting what they had heard. A noise near the gate, a shadow near the barn, the echo of running feet. Nothing was certain, but certainty was never the goal. What mattered was the telling, the shared act of remembering. Through story, they rebuilt safety. Through repetition, they rebuilt calm. In this way, the village survived, not through walls or weapons, but through listening, remembering, enduring. Each sound that passed through the night became part of its fabric, woven into the rhythm of life itself. The thief moved on, the village repaired its balance, and the cycle continued, season after season, like breath between two hearts. The night and its watchers. The shared sleep. Inside each cottage, sleep was never deep. It came in thin layers like frost upon the fields, beautiful, fragile, easily broken. Families slept in shifts, half resting, half listening. The room was small, a single space for every living thing. Parents, children, a goat, perhaps a chicken too slow to catch before dusk. Their breaths mingled, forming a low rhythm that echoed through the thatch. In that warmth, the air smelled of smoke and hay, of sweat and candle wax, of life condensed into one quiet body. Sleep was a shared act of trust. The walls were thin, the doors a single board fastened with rope. Beside each straw bed lay something useful, a stick, a poker, a dull knife kept within reach. It was not courage that kept them close, but habit. When the floor moaned, someone stirred. When the latch quivered under wind, someone listened. A cough in the dark could summon a dozen half-awake breaths, a pause heavy with imagination. The night was not an enemy, but neither was it a friend. It pressed close to the walls, shifting like an animal, testing the edges of warmth. The darkness outside was complete. No lamplight spilled from windows, no moon strong enough to show more than shape. The world beyond the door was only suggestion, an expanse of sound and scent. The rustle of leaves, the groan of wood, the whisper of water down the road. The villagers learned to recognize these voices. They knew which sounds belonged to the earth and which to man. A distant bark meant safety. A sudden silence meant something had changed. In such nights, the body learned to sleep like a soldier, half within dreams, half ready to move. Mothers wrapped infants in cloth and kept them near the chest, where the heartbeat could drown the wind. Fathers drifted in and out of waking, the mind counting sounds as though counting sheep, door, breath, fire, rain. Even the animals took part in the watch. The dog lifted its head at every shift of air. The goat stomped once when it smelled unfamiliar scent. Together they formed a quiet defense more faithful than steel. For the thief, such nights were a labyrinth. The silence that seemed peaceful from afar was, up close, a maze of hazards. Every heartbeat sounded like thunder, every breath seemed too loud. The thief moved between walls that listened, across floors that spoke. Straw crackled, hinges sighed, water dripped in a rhythm that could betray a step. They had to move not just quietly, but kindly, as though asking permission from the air itself. Beyond the cottage walls, frost settled upon the fields. The stars hung low, unmoving, bright enough to see but not to trust. The road gleamed faintly with dew. Somewhere, a barn door swayed, and the sound rolled through the dark like a warning. The thief paused, hand to chest, waiting for the stillness to settle again. In those moments, time stretched. The night became endless, the heart an echo against the ribs. Back inside, the sleepers shifted. A child murmured. The fire sighed. The danger passed, unnoticed, but deeply felt. And so the hours moved, slow, circular, uneventful. It was not safety that filled the room, but endurance. To live through another night was victory enough. When dawn finally arrived, it crept softly, pale and cold, finding its way between the cracks. The people rose without hurry, the thief already gone, both grateful for the same thing, survival without sound, the long listening. The medieval night was longer than ours. Time itself seemed to rest heavier then. The hours between sunset and dawn could stretch like rope, each minute drawn taut with stillness. Within that stillness lived awareness, the kind that kept people alive when walls were thin and locks were dreams. The poor did not sleep to escape the night. They slept inside it, folded into its rhythm, half awake to every sound that touched their door. The hearth was the heart of that rhythm. Its glow was small but faithful, the only light that dared to move when the world stopped. Beside it, shadows swayed gently, slow as thought. The fire spoke in whispers, its crackle both comfort and warning. When it dimmed, someone rose to feed it. When it brightened too suddenly, someone turned to look. The flame was both watchman and prayer, keeping the dark at a respectful distance. Outside, the village lay hushed under the same veil. Roofs gleamed with dew. Smoke from the last fires hung low, drifting like memory. Somewhere a dog barked once, then again, shorter, sharper. The noise rippled through the air, crossed by the answering cry of another. The sound meant little, but it reminded everyone that the world was still breathing. Life did not vanish in the dark, it only hid behind the hum of wind and the creak of wood. Inside, sleep came in turns. The eldest might stay awake first, whispering a few words to the fire, then dozing as the next watcher opened their eyes. There was no schedule, no command, only intuition passed through generations. The night was a shared responsibility, like tending a field or a child. It belonged to everyone and no one. Even in exhaustion, they took turns guarding the small circle of warmth that was home. Children learned early the language of sound. They knew the difference between the soft step of a neighbor and the uneven tread of a stranger. They learned that silence could mean peace, or danger hiding its breath. To them the dark was alive. They feared it, yes, but they also understood it. The dark had moods and they learned to read them. A calm night meant the wind had chosen mercy. A restless one meant change was near. For those who watched from the edge of sleep, time became something else. The hours lost their number. There was only before dawn, after rain, between dreams. Memory blurred with listening. The sound of the river might become a lullaby, the hum of insects a kind of prayer. In that half-conscious state, people were closest to the earth. They did not control it. They coexisted with it, breathing at its pace. Far from the cottages, a thief still moved, perhaps the same one who had crept past the dogs, perhaps another, nameless, drawn by hunger more than intent. They paused at the edge of the lane, watching the faint glow of a window. In that glow, they could almost feel the warmth they lacked, the closeness of bodies, the gentle murmur of sleep. For a heartbeat, they did not move. They simply listened, to the fire's breath, to the creak of the wood, to the soft rhythm of life they would never fully join. When they turned away, the night received them again without judgment. The road swallowed their footsteps, the air closed around them, and their shape vanished like smoke. Somewhere behind, a dog whimpered once, then settled back into dreams. The thief walked on beneath the frozen stars, guided by nothing but the instinct to keep moving. Back in the cottages, dawn began its slow return. The air lightened, the shadows thinned. Someone yawned and stirred the ashes to life again, the room filled with the smell of smoke and bread, of tired eyes and patient hands. The night had ended, though it had never truly gone. It lingered in the corners, soft and familiar, like the echo of a story told too many times. And as the morning spread across the fields, the watchers finally slept. Their work was done. The world was quiet once more, quiet, enduring, and alive, top of form. When caught. The ritual of punishment. Punishment waited not in anger but in ritual. In towns across the countryside, justice unfolded with the same slow rhythm as the tolling of the bell. When a thief was caught, there were no shouts of triumph, no bright banners in the wind. There was only procedure, deliberate, unhurried, almost tender in its precision. The square filled one step at a time. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Men paused from their labor. Dogs wove between the legs of strangers. The air carried the smell of hay, of wet stone, of rain that had not yet fallen. At the center of it all stood the accused, a figure smaller than the moment, wrists bound with rope darkened by other hands before. Their eyes were not defiant, only tired. The guard beside them shifted his weight, the chain at his belt giving a dull sound. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith wiped his palms on his apron and watched in silence. No one spoke. The crowd gathered not to judge but to witness. Punishment in those days was meant to be seen. It was not rage that drove it, but remembrance. The law was a story told upon the body so that others might sleep more easily when night returned. Sometimes a letter was burned into the skin, a T for thief, a V for vagabond. The smell of seared flesh mixed with rain, a scent both human and eternal. It rose like incense, brief and unforgotten. Sometimes the whip spoke instead, the lash tracing its own language across the back. Each stroke was slow, precise, counted aloud by a voice that did not tremble. There was no hatred in the faces of those who watched. There was weariness, perhaps, and a quiet agreement that the world must keep its order somehow. The punishment was a ritual of balance, the act of setting the scales right again after hunger had tipped them. The body bent, the bell rang once, and the day continued. When the stocks were used, the sound of wood closing was heavy but familiar. The boards held firm, carved by hands that had done this before. The condemned stood, neck and wrists encased, the world passing by in slow procession. Some offered a crust of bread, some spat. Most simply looked, then looked away. There was no spectacle, no cruelty born of joy, only the presence of consequence, ordinary and absolute. The rain often came then, thin and steady, washing the square clean. The water ran through the cracks between stones, carrying with it dust, ash, and a little blood. It was as though the earth itself participated in the ritual, taking back what had been marked. By evening, the square would empty, leaving behind the faint smell of smoke and the echo of quiet voices returning to their homes. For the thief, the world did not end that day. Pain passed, the mark remained. It became a second name, carried on the skin long after memory faded. In the marketplace, eyes lingered for a moment longer. At the well, conversations paused. Yet in time, even this attention dulled. The mark became part of the body's geography, another scar in a world built from them. Justice in the 14th century did not chase redemption. It offered no speeches, no lessons, no mercy, but also no malice. It was an act of order, not emotion. And in that strange stillness there was something deeply human, the recognition that wrongdoing and survival were often the same thing, divided only by luck. As night returned, the villagers spoke softly of what they had seen. Not gossip, only memory. The thief's name would pass from mouth to mouth, thinning with each telling until it became story, a warning without anger. Then as darkness settled, they would close their doors and sleep a little easier, believing for a moment that the world had been made safe again. The echo of justice. By morning, the square was almost quiet again. The scaffold stood empty, its ropes swaying lightly in the wind. Birds perched on the beams, indifferent to the weight they had held the day before. A few drops of wax from the burned letters clung to the ground, pale against the dark stone. The punishment was over, yet its presence lingered like the aftertaste of iron. The town exhaled, returning to its rhythm of market cries and hammer blows, as if nothing had happened, though everyone remembered. For the villagers, the act of witnessing was part of life's cycle. To see a thief punished was to remind oneself of boundaries, of what belonged to whom, of how fragile the thread between need and crime truly was. They did not attend out of cruelty. They attended out of duty, the same way they attended harvest, marriage, or death. It was a ceremony of survival. The body that suffered became a vessel for the fears of others. Through it they believed the night might grow a little quieter. The one who bore the mark carried more than pain. They carried memory, both theirs and the town's. In the weeks that followed, work became scarce, voices softer. Some left, walking toward the forests or the next parish where no one knew their face. Some stayed, living at the edge of things, between forgiveness and forgetting. To live after punishment was its own kind of endurance, quieter but longer than pain itself. When the sun set again, the square looked almost peaceful. The rain had washed the blood away, the ropes hung dry. Smoke from the chimneys rose into a pale sky. A stranger could have walked through and never known what had happened there. Only the earth remembered, and perhaps the air, carrying with it a faint echo, a sound between a sigh and a whisper, something that once was voice but no longer claimed to be. Those who lived nearby grew used to this silence. They did not speak of the thief, but they did not forget. When the wind blew from the west, bringing the scent of rain, they sometimes felt it again. That moment, when the crowd stood still, the world held its breath, and justice unfolded without haste. There was no joy in it, no vengeance, only the sense that things had returned to balance, however briefly. The punishment of the thief was never about the individual. It was about reassurance, the fragile belief that the world could be measured, that wrong could be corrected, that chaos could be quieted. The villagers needed that belief as they needed bread and fire. Without it, fear would have returned in the shape of every shadow. So they built their comfort on ritual, on repetition, on the quiet choreography of justice performed beneath grey skies. And yet, the thief, even in shame, remained part of the same story. The mark did not erase their humanity. Beneath the scar, the same hunger beat, the same breath rose each morning. Life continued, stubborn and small. They still watched the sunrise, still listened for the wind in the fields, still dreamed of bread. In time, the mark itself faded to a faint shape, less a warning than a memory. The earth, too, forgot. Grass grew between the stones of the square. The rain softened the edges of the stalks until they blended with the soil. The people who once gathered grew old, and their children learned new fears. Only the rhythm remained: punishment, watching, forgetting, peace. It was not cruelty that survived, but continuity. At dusk, when the bell rang once more, its tone drifted across the town with the same calm as before. It carried neither sorrow nor triumph, only the steady hum of existence. The thief, wherever they were, might have heard it, might have paused for a moment, hand against the scar, listening. Not in bitterness, but in understanding. The world had not punished out of hate. It had simply reminded itself to keep breathing. And so, as night returned, the cycle began again. The fires were stoked, the doors were bolted. The village grew quiet beneath the weight of its own order. Above the rooftops, the sky turned black and patient, Somewhere, far away, another figure walked between hunger and chance, and the earth, as always, kept its watch, silent, enduring, and kind. The prison and the end. The waiting room of stone. Prison was not a sentence, it was a waiting room. Beneath the floor of the courthouse or the tavern, somewhere between commerce and judgment, a low chamber waited, damp, airless, carved from the patience of stone. Light entered only through a slit high on the wall, a blade of pale dust slicing through the dark. It was enough to see the shape of things, the curve of a chain, the outline of a bowl, the slow shimmer of water running down the wall. The air smelled of rot, of straw, of bodies too long enclosed. Here sat the drunk, the wanderer, the unlucky. They shared the same silence, broken only by the scrape of movement and the distant hum of the town above. Somewhere, a market carried on. Hooves struck cobblestones. A woman laughed. But down here, time had a different texture, thick, slow, indifferent. The prisoners did not speak much. Words seemed to dissolve before reaching the ear. The walls kept them, storing each whisper until the air grew heavy with echoes. Food came, if it came at all, from pity. A heel of bread pushed through the gap, a bowl of water left where hands could find it. The guards were neither cruel nor kind. They were simply part of the mechanism, the turning of the key, the sound of boots, the closing of the door. When they opened it, the light hurt. It entered like judgment, filling every corner, revealing what was once better unseen. Nights in the cell were endless. The dark was complete, the kind that swallowed the breath before it left the mouth. The prisoners slept against the walls, shoulder to shoulder, their warmth the only fire. Sometimes someone spoke in dreams. Sometimes someone stopped breathing. The living adjusted without comment. In such places, death was not an interruption, but a continuation. The water dripped from somewhere unseen, marking time more faithfully than the church bell above. Each drop was a reminder that even in confinement, the world continued its work. Outside, seasons turned. Inside, the air stayed the same. Those who waited learned to measure days not by light, but by sound, the footsteps above, the opening of the door, the distant toll of the hour that did not belong to them. When the guards came for one, they came quietly. No ceremony, no words. The chain was lifted, the door opened, the prisoner rose. The others looked on without moving. They had seen it before, the slow ascent of a man returning to air, to wind, to sky. Sometimes the walk ended in mercy. More often, it ended in the square. Above, the town moved with its usual rhythm. The market stalls were already open, the smell of bread and smoke mingling in the air. Children played near the fountain. The gallows stood beyond, simple and wooden, part of the landscape like a tree or a cross. The rope swayed lightly in the wind. It was neither hidden nor glorified. It was a tool, nothing more. When the prisoner reached it, the crowd was ready but calm. No shouting, no spectacle, only the low murmur of people acknowledging what they had come to see. The same faces who had shared bread with him last week now watched him return to silence. The law, in its own slow way, had completed its circle. The body bent, the sky looked down without expression. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped. The bell rang, and the moment passed into memory. The day continued. The return to silence. Afterward, the world resumed its rhythm. The gallows, cleaned and empty, stood against the grey horizon like another piece of scaffolding waiting for work. The townsfolk dispersed, their footsteps steady on wet ground. The air smelled faintly of rain, of ash, of nothing particular. It was the smell of life continuing. In the square, straw covered the earth where the shadow had fallen. The market returned within an hour. A man sold onions where a man had stood. The clatter of coins replaced the echo of prayer. The same bell that had tolled for punishment now rang for noon. Its tone was not sorrowful, only consistent. The rhythm of the town demanded no reflection. The guards carried their tools back through the narrow lanes. The rope was coiled, the block washed, the record written in a hand too weary for judgment. To them, this was a craft like any other, necessary, repetitive, precise. They did not dwell on it, for the world gave no reward for dwelling. Order was its own completion. In the taverns that night, people spoke quietly. Some mentioned the name. Some did not. The ale was poured, the dice rolled, and laughter returned, soft but real. The thief's absence became another space the living filled. Every village had such spaces, small, invisible vacancies left by those who had slipped away. They became part of the air, part of the way the place sounded at dusk. The families of the condemned moved carefully through the following days. They drew water from the well before dawn, baked their bread before the street stirred. No one cursed them, but few spoke. It was not cruelty, only the human need to keep distance from misfortune. Time, however, was kind. In a few seasons, the name faded, the story softened. What had been a warning became a whisper, then a pause. The world does not remember pain for long, it remembers patterns. Prison and gallows were part of those patterns. They existed not to end lives, but to maintain balance. Like the market, the harvest, or the church bell, they marked the passage of time. Their presence reminded people that life continued only because it was constantly mended. To punish was to stitch the world back together after it had frayed. The needle was rough, but the seam held. At night, when fog gathered low over the river, the gallows vanished into it. Only the creak of wood remained, a faint rhythm, almost gentle. Birds perched on the beam, unaware of what it had held. Dew formed on the rope, glistening in moonlight. The town slept, and the world was once again at rest. In the small house by the wall, the executioner cleaned his tools. His wife mended clothes by the fire. Their children slept in the next room. The man's hands were steady, his face calm. He was not haunted, he did not pray. His task was part of the same life as hers, the weaving, the tending, the sleeping. Tomorrow he would help repair a fence or mend a roof. The roles of the living overlapped, none were singular. Outside, the fields waited for planting. The same wind that had moved the rope now moved through the wheat. The earth accepted everything equally: seeds, rain, blood, silence. Its patience was older than any law. And so the days turned again. The prisoners below the courthouse waited. The guards walked their rounds. The gallows stood in quiet readiness, a reminder not of fear, but of continuity. The people lived within that rhythm, never questioning its fairness, only trusting its stability. When the sky greyed with dawn, the first carts rolled into the market. Smoke rose from chimneys. Somewhere, a child laughed. The town, untouched in its essence, began another day. Above the square, the bell rang once, steady, low, familiar. Beneath it, the stone floor held the faint echo of 1,000 footsteps that had come and gone. The sky remained the same grey it had always been. The world did not mourn. It simply continued, quiet, patient, and eternal. The last years, The slow return. For those who escaped, life did not brighten. Freedom arrived not as triumph, but as another kind of waiting. Quieter, lonelier, uncelebrated. The years that followed did not bring peace. They only stretched, long and pale, like winter fields left fallow. The old thieves moved through villages like fading shadows, their steps uneven, their breath shallow. They carried the weight of their years in silence, neither proud nor ashamed. Time had worn the sharpness from them. What remained was endurance, stripped of all color, pure and bare. They walked the same narrow roads they once fled down in fear, passing the same fences, the same barking dogs, the same smell of wet earth after rain. But now no one chased them. The world had grown used to their invisibility. They were no longer danger, only memory walking upright. Some stopped to ask for bread, their voices hoarse with disuse. Some offered small labor in exchange for shelter. A repaired fence, a pile of firewood stacked in neat silence. Others vanished altogether into the woods, drawn to the company of trees that never asked their names. Among the branches and mist, they became part of the landscape, a whisper of movement, a flicker of cloth against bark, already half forgotten. There were no retirements, no soft endings. Just the gradual slowing of everything, fewer words, fewer places to go, fewer reasons to rise before dawn. The hands that once stole out of hunger now trembled too much to untie a knot. The hunger itself had not left, it had merely changed shape. It was no longer for food or safety, but for rest, the deep, untroubled kind that life had denied them. They longed not for comfort, but for stillness, to be allowed, at last, to stop. In the evenings, when the fields glowed with the last gold of day, they sat by the road, watching smoke rise from other people's chimneys. The scent of wood, the murmur of voices, the small pulse of domestic peace, all of it reached them from a distance. Sometimes laughter drifted through the air, muffled and harmless. It reminded them that warmth still existed somewhere, that the world had not grown cruel, only indifferent. They did not envy it. They listened the way one listens to rain against a roof they will never enter, accepting that sound itself can be enough. Those who found kindness were rare but real. A farmer's wife might leave a bowl of soup by the fence, covered with a cloth to keep it warm. A shepherd might toss an old cloak toward a ditch where a figure lay sleeping. A child, not yet taught to fear, might wave shyly as they passed. These small gestures, quiet as breath, were enough to keep a life tethered a little longer. The old thieves never asked for more. Gratitude became their only possession, a weightless thing they carried easily. At night, they slept where the wind allowed, barns, ditches, abandoned huts, places forgotten by both map and memory. Sometimes they shared space with stray dogs or the sighing of cattle. The straw beneath them was rough, but real. The darkness, absolute. Above, the stars kept their silent watch, neither cruel nor kind. When frost gathered along the road, they dreamed of warmth, the warmth they once took and the hands that struck them for it. The dreams were soft, emptied of regret, as though the years had sanded even memory into dust fine enough to breathe. When spring came and the rivers swelled, some drifted toward the forests, seeking quiet that people no longer gave. The trees asked no questions. The moss accepted every footprint without judgment. There the thieves could rest without being seen, without being named. Their lives, once measured by pursuit and escape, dissolved into the rhythm of leaves and wind, into the patient breathing of the forest. The slow dripping of water from branch to root replaced the ticking of time. They became part of that quiet. No longer hunted, no longer hiding. Sometimes, travelers crossing the woods would glimpse them from a distance, a figure wrapped in grey cloth, standing still among the trees. No one called out. No one disturbed them. In a world that forgot easily, even ghosts were left to their solitude. When storms came, they disappeared deeper into the green. When sunlight returned, they emerged again, pale as smoke, unchanged. Back in the villages, their absence went unnoticed. Life continued its circle: births, harvests, weddings and debts. The markets grew louder, the fields richer. The gallows still stood at the edge of the square, its wood greyed with age. Children no longer knew why it was there. They played beneath it, tying ribbons to its beam. The symbol of fear had become a toy, its meaning erased by time's indifference. The old laws remained carved in the same fading ink. The same watchmen walked their rounds, the same bells tolled for justice. But the need for punishment had grown quieter, gentler, perhaps because the faces of the hungry had vanished from sight. The world continued to guard itself, unaware that the last of its thieves had already begun to fade into the folds of wind and distance. In the corners of taverns, their stories lingered like smoke. A traveller might speak of a man who once slept beneath a bridge, who fixed his cartwheel in exchange for bread. Another might recall an old woman with a scar across her cheek, who mended clothes and vanished before morning. These tales were not told as warnings anymore, but as curiosities. Small, nameless echoes from a past that felt both near and unreal. Even these stories would one day fall silent, leaving only the faint outline of a truth too simple to disappear. That hunger had once taught people how to steal, and life had taught them how to endure. By the time the last of them lay down beneath the open sky, the world had already moved on. The villages slept, the bells tolled for other reasons. Rain gathered softly along the eaves of new houses built on old ground. The wind, passing over the fields, carried no remembrance of names, only the rhythm of breath, of patience, of survival. And so it ended, not with sorrow, not with redemption, but with rest. The old thieves, having spent their lives in motion, finally learned the stillness they had been chasing all along. Their story closed without ceremony, as natural as dusk following day, as inevitable as sleep after hunger. The world forgot their faces, but it kept their silence. It carried it forward, soft, endless, unbroken, into the long quiet that waits for everyone who has ever tried simply to endure. Top of form, bottom of form, the quiet disappearance. They lived quietly, and they disappeared quietly. No marker, no ceremony, no one to say the words. A coat left on a fence post, a bowl half filled with rain. These became their monuments. Sometimes a shepherd would find them at the edge of a field, eyes closed, body still, as though finally asleep after a long, long watch. The villagers buried them where they fell. The ground was soft, and the earth, as always, was kind. No one kept their names, the parish records were too thin, the memories too brief. But the lesson remained, passed not through words, but through silence. People remembered the story, even if they forgot the person. They remembered that hunger had a shape, that desperation once walked their roads. It made them lock their doors at night, yes, but it also made them share bread more often. Survival had its own kind of legacy. In time, even those traces vanished. The forest reclaimed the huts, the fields erased the paths, the rivers swallowed the footprints left in mud. Only the rhythm endured: work, hunger, mercy, night. the same circle turning century after century. The world did not mourn its forgotten ones, but it carried them within its soil. Every harvest, every loaf of bread baked from that soil, bore the quiet weight of their endurance. In the evenings, when smoke rose once again over the fields, the air carried a kind of peace. The people who lived did not speak of thieves or punishment. They spoke of weather, of crops, of children. But beneath their words flowed something older, a shared awareness that life had never been easy, that goodness was fragile, and that kindness, when it appeared, was sacred because of it. The gallows rotted and fell, the prisons filled with dust, the stones that had held the punished became part of walls that held grain instead. The world repurposed its cruelty into shelter. And in that quiet transformation lay a small grace. The memory of suffering, softened by time, became wisdom. As the centuries passed, stories replaced facts. The thief became a ghost, a warning, a whisper told by the fire. Some said they haunted crossroads. Some said they protected travelers. But all agreed on one thing, that they had once been human, and that was enough. By now, the roads they walked are gone. The villages have changed their names. But if you listen on a still night, when the wind moves through old chimneys and the rain taps gently at the shutters, you might hear it. That faint rhythm, the same one that moved through every life before yours. The rhythm of survival, soft as breath. The world forgets names, but it never forgets the pattern. The thief, the guard, the judge, the farmer, all part of one quiet endurance. Life continues because it must. Hunger fades, then returns. Justice sleeps, then wakes. And in between, the world breathes. Somewhere, in that breath, lies peace. Not the peace of victory, but the peace of completion. The story has gone full circle. The hand that once reached in need now rests. The roads they walked have turned to soil, and from that soil new lives rise, unaware, innocent, shining in the same old light. The world has forgotten their names, but it remembers the truth they carried. That survival leaves its own kind of scar, and that every scar, in time, becomes part of the shape of endurance. And now, the night deepens, the fields grow still, the wind moves softly through the eaves. The story has ended, but the quiet remains. It stretches out, unbroken, holding you as it has held them, gently, endlessly, at the pace of rest. As you're closing, the quiet remains, approximately 250 words, rewritten in the sleep narration tone, slow, poetic, deeply tranquil, designed as the final fade-out of your 90-minute piece. It keeps the meaning of your original, expands it with atmosphere, breath, and emotional stillness. The fire fades to embers, small breaths of light sinking into the dark. The air cools, carrying the scent of ash and rain. Outside, the world grows still. The wind moves softly through empty streets, brushing over doors and windows that no longer remember who once passed beneath them. The voices are gone, yet something of them lingers. A murmur folded into the silence, a warmth left behind like the glow of a forgotten lamp. Every age has known its hunger, its shadows, its search for warmth. Hands have built, taken, mended, and released, each movement part of the same slow rhythm of survival. Empires have risen and fallen. Names have been spoken, then lost. The stories change, but the heartbeat beneath them does not. It continues. Steady, patient, unafraid. Power fades. Memory softens. Stone becomes soil. Soil becomes seed. What was once a cry becomes a whisper, and what was once struggle becomes rest. The world exhales and the long breath of history folds into sleep. Now, only the quiet remains. Endless, gentle, kind. It moves through the ruins and the roots, through water and wind, through everything that endures by letting go. It holds all that has passed, not as sorrow, but as calm. So let the night take you. The story is over, but the stillness continues. Steady, breathing, eternal.